The sun over the borderlands of New Mexico wasn't warm. It was merciless and didn't shine. It scoured every rock and crevice in the mesa, radiating a cruel heat that blurred the horizon. Dust swirled like ghosts rising from the earth. Colton. Hayes rode through it with his head low, one hand steadying the rein, and the other cradling a small fragile bundle wrapped in faded linen. Her breath grew faint as she realized the last drop of water was gone by daylight. His canteen clanked empty against his saddle. "Hold on, little Rose," he whispered, his voice raw from heat and grief. "Just a little longer dust waters not far now." Dust crossing it wasn't much, just a few buildings, a windmill, and rumors that the widow, Mallister out by the ridge, still had goats and a kind heart. It was a last chance, maybe their only one. His mare Bramble stumbled, but kept moving the dunkled. Mustang had been with him since before the war ended. Now she was thered in sweat ribs, showing hooves kicking up more grit than she cleared, but she obeyed. Somehow she understood the urgency of the burden they carried. Colton's thoughts drifted in and out like the heat shimmer on the horizon. He remembered Mary Beth's smile, how she used to hum while sewing that tune. She always sang about the Blue Ridge mountains, even though she'd never seen them. He remembered her scream as she gave birth. On a straw mattress in a half-burned barn, under the hands of a traveling preacher's wife, the blood, so much blood her final words had been a whisper barely audible beneath the cries of their newborn daughter. "Coliton, don't let her die out here. Find her a home, promise me." He had promised with blood still on his hands and heartbreak in his throat. He had sworn it. Now, 3 days later, he feared he'd lied a cough rattled up from Leia's chest, too dry to be real sound. His attempts to moisten a towel with spit and apply it to her lips failed. Colton's eyes burned from the sun and sand and from impotence. He'd fought guys twice his size and survived. Union ambushes and Confederate camp starvation could not prepare him for this calm, inexorable demise. The land eventually broke. The horizon rooftops, a crooked church tower, dustwater, crossing civilization, or whatever. He kicked Bramble softly. "Darling, we're close." The mare continued down the slope past jagged rock and sun-baked bush till the town's first buildings appeared, leaning planks and tired paint. Colton didn't care and dismounted in front of the general store. He nearly fell over as his legs fought to recall how to walk. The store's screen door creaked as he entered. The air was no cooler, but at least it didn't smell like death and dry bones. The round man behind the counter stared up at the infant, Colton's Grime, and the colt tied to his thigh, and remarked, "We don't have anything for you." Colton blinked. "I need milk goats, milk cows, milk powdered, anything." She did not eat. A man raised his hand. "Ain't got none." Colton stepped up, desperate. "I'll pay." I responded we had none. And the man snarled, "Try the saloon, maybe one of the females will be charitable." He left without speaking. Colton stood there for a while, letting the world weigh on him. The Broken Drum Saloon was barely more than a shack with swinging doors, and a piano that sounded like it had been drowned in whiskey inside the smell hit. Him first sweat, stale beer, tobacco, and something sour underneath conversations died as he entered. All eyes turned to him, or, more specifically, the bundle in his arms. A woman in a red corset and too much rouge leaned against the bar. Colton approached. The barman, a thin man with a weapon behind him and contemptuous eyes needing milk. "You look like hell ain't a nursery, mister. I've got a $silver left. Please." The barman waved him off. "Try the widow out past the Ridge Mallister. She's got goats." "I hear," or Ed Colton didn't wait to thank him. He turned and left, mounting Bramble again, heading out towards the North Ridge. His legs were jelly, and his heart pounded against his ribs like it wanted out. The sun was setting, and shadows stretched long across the plain as he approached the small ranch house tucked between two low hills. He saw a lantern burning on the porch, and hope flickered fragile and wild in his chest. Eleanor Mallister's home smelled of sage goat hair and old pine. It wasn't much a single room with a lean-to kitchen and a back porch sagging under the weight of time. But to Colton, it might as well have been a palace. It was warm, clean, alive. Ellie took the bundle from his arms. Without a word, her fingers were quick, confident, and kind. She peeled back the linen wrap with a gentle touch that made Colton's throat tighten, her brow furrowed, when she saw Leia's cracked lips, sunken cheeks, and the slow rise and fall of her chest. 2 days, she asked. Almost 3. Colton croaked. Ellie didn't scold him. She didn't ask questions. She simply handed him a tin cup of water, then moved to the corner where a modest bed sat beside a small rocking chair. With practiced ease, she slipped the baby against her chest, unbuttoned her blouse, and brought Leia to her breast. Colton turned away more out of emotion than modesty. He'd held that child against his heart through sandstorms, nightmares, and near collapse. Now he heard a sound he thought he might never hear again. A baby suckling, then sighing, contented and alive. He sank into a chair near the stove and dropped his head into his hands outside. The wind howled through the hills, sending dust and sage tumbling across the yard inside. The world had shrunk to the sound of crackling fire, soft breathing, and the quiet rustle of life. Returning to a long silence, Ellie didn't speak again until Isla finished. She's strong, dehydrated, but lucky. Her father's too stubborn. I'm Colton Hayes, and this is Leia, my daughter. We were living near Rio Largo. A few cabins, some cattle, and a preacher. The Garza boys came riding in looking for a fight, and I wasn't there. Ellie watched him closely, and they shot up the place and burned it. Mary Beth bled out before the preacher's wife could finish the birthing. I buried her under a cottonwood tree and took the baby. Dust water isn't kind, mister. Hayes, this place forgot itself a long time ago. Colton's eyes searched hers. Still beats the trail. She rose, wrapped Leia in a fresh cloth, and laid her in a small wooden cradle beside the hearth, then poured coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to him. I don't get many visitors, and those who come rarely stay. Dust. Miners traveling west used to cross here, but the veins dried up and the rail avoided us by 30 miles. All that's left now are broken fences and broken folks. You live here alone? Said, I do now, she said. My husband died 2 winters ago. Pneumonia, no doctor for 50 miles, just me and some borrowed medicine. She sat across from him, watching the firelight dance in the baby's sleeping face. I was a midwife in Kansas before the war, and all the loss left the room, silent except for the wind's constant hum and the embers changing. I'll be gone by morning, he said after a long pause. You'll stay the night, she replied firmly. You both need rest. We'll talk about tomorrow when it comes. He didn't argue that night. Colton slept on a pallet near the hearth. Bramble was stabled. In the old barn with fresh hay and a bucket of water, Leia, belly full, slept deeply wrapped in a warm wool blanket with one tiny hand curled into a fist. Colton lay, awake longer than he wanted, till his eyes drifted from the fire to the shadow of Ellie. Sitting quietly near the cradle, she was humming something soft. He closed his eyes and didn't dream of fire for days. Beth used to hum too. Morning brought cornbread and coffee, and Colton sat up carefully, his back stiffening him as a grown man. He stepped outdoors into the thin light of dawn to find Ellie tending to the garden out back and Leia cooing quietly. Dust water crossing lay below the ridge like a forgotten thought. Just a handful of buildings scattered along a crooked road. A church without a roof, a saloon with a broken sign, a jailhouse with no law, and somewhere down there, Colton knew, were people who'd trade a man's life for the reward on his head. Whether the charges were true or not, Ellie joined him on the porch. Really? Asterisk, she asked. Coliton didn't lie. There's a poster saw 1-2 towns back. Says I killed 4 men in Arizona. I fought in the war and ran with the wrong crowd for 6 months. But I've been clean since meeting Mary Beth. Ellie studied him for a while. So you have two options. Mr. Hayes looked down at the town and then back at the cradle inside. I promised her mama I'd find her a home. Ella nodded. Sometimes a home isn't a place, but the people who stay when things get tough. Baby Leia sighed contentedly as the sun rose, making Dustwater Crossing seem less bleak. The wind picked up that afternoon, rushing across the plain in fits and snarls as if trying to take the past from the earth and spread it across the rocks. Colton stood by the corral behind Eleanor Mallister's house, tightening a loose rail bramble rested in the shade of the barn, content with oats and cool water inside the house. Ellie was laying baby Leia down for a nap. Colton wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve, and his shirt clung to his back. He hadn't meant to stay, but something about Ellie's quiet steadiness and the soft rhythm of a baby breathing easy for the first time in days had Ella entered the porch wearing a flower and herb dusted apron. You fixed that gate? You live out here long 7 years, my husband and I. Bought this place with our wedding savings back then. Dustwater had plans railway church schoolhouse. Then the mines ran dry, and everything dried up with it. She gazed out towards the dusty skyline. He got sick the second winter fever. Ellie shrugged, not dismissively, but in that quiet way people do when they've become used to loss. The desert teaches you one thing. Nothing stays, but if you have grit, you hold on to what you can. I made a promise, he murmured almost to himself, to Mary Beth that I'd keep our baby alive, give her a home someplace with light. Ellie watched him. You've done right by her so far. Colton laughed without humor. She nearly died in my arms, but she didn't. He turned to look at her. Eliza's eyes weren't soft like Mary Beth's, but were sharp like someone who'd walked through fire and kept walking. She needs more than a saddle and a prayer. I don't know if I'm enough. Ellie crossed her arms. None of us are not alone, but a baby don't need perfection. She needs someone who stays. Silence fell between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable inside the house. Leia began to stir. A soft whimper rose, not urgent enough to pull Ellie back through the door. Colton stayed where he was, watching the horizon as the wind died down. He didn't trust this peace. Ellie spoke again. You got a plan? Colton chewed tentatively. Go west. Maybe try Fort Stanton. Heard a new town was growing near the Silver Claims. What should he do there? He hesitated. Start over if I can. But Ellie looked at him hard. You can't outrun the past, Colton, unless you stop and face it. The first time he saw Leia gurgle from her crib, smiling in her sleep, hurt him harder than he thought. I don't want her growing up like me, he said, then offer her something better. He looked at Ellie again, the widow with the hard eyes, soft hands, and a house full of healing you already have. That night, as he watched over his daughter's sleep, Colton Hayes realized something terrifying. He didn't want to leave, and in the Wild West, wanting something that bad was dangerous. The next morning, the wind dropped to a whisper, making the desert feel watchful. Colton stood beside Ellie's goat pen, hammering in a new latch, while the goats bled lazily behind him, unimpressed by his craftsmanship inside the house. Leela was cooing softly while Ellie churned butter with rhythmic focus for a moment. Everything felt almost normal, but normal never lasted long in Dustwater. By noon, Colton rode Bramble into town. He needed supplies, ammunition, flour, coffee, and a sense of whether he could stay or if trouble was already brewing. A few watched him from shaded porches as he tied Bramble outside the general store, inside the storekeeper. A different man than the one who turned him away days earlier looked up from behind the counter, gay, narrow-bearded, and chewing tobacco methodically. You're the fellow with the baby. Colton nodded, placing a small pouch of coins on the counter. The man didn't move, staring for too long. He finally said, just passing through. The man reached under the counter and placed a box of cartridges down slowly. You're not the only one passing through lately. Marshall appeared yesterday. Trenton, tall, gray coat, serious eyes, asked about a man with a scar under his chin who might be traveling with a child. Colton felt his chest tighten and struggled to keep his face neutral. He reached for the coffee tin, hoping the man leaned in or dust water. Towns like this don't get many strangers, especially ones with babies. And army scars. Colton picked up the supplies and left without saying a word as he walked back to Bramble, feeling the weight of every glance from the saloon, post office, and leaning church. Ellie was waiting on the porch, sleeping in her arms, and her face was unreadable. You went into town because we needed food cartridges. Ella didn't blink when talking. Colton tethered Bramble and stepped onto the porch. Marshall's asking questions. Ellie softly rocked Leia. That man you rode with, the one who turned on you. He had a name. Jonas Finch, known as Red, ran with a crew out of Tucson after the war. I joined when I had no better sense and thought we were just running cattle, doing supply jobs. Then a job went bad, and a stagecoach full of settlers burned down in cold blood. I tried to stop it, but Red framed me and left my name at the scene. Ellie looked at him hard and said, "You've been running ever since." Colton nodded until Mary Beth made me believe I could be more. Ellie placed Yayla carefully in the cradle behind her and approached Colton so he could smell the lavender she used in the washwater. "If you stay here," she added quietly, "you're risking yourself and that baby." He slept light. His pistol stayed on the table beside him, fully loaded, and he swore he saw Ellie standing by the window, watching the road, waiting before he fell asleep. 3 days of uncomfortable clear skies heat that bakes dust to bone and makes the environment feel like it could catch fire if someone breathes too hard. Colton chopped logs behind Ellie's house while she strung wet linens to dry. Leia lay in a basket under the cottonwood shade, fussing softly. The air smelt of goat milk and pine ash. It was almost serene until the horsemen appeared. 2 horses kicked up a cloud down the crossing. Ellie saw them first, squinting against the glare company. She said, brushing flour off her apron. Colton dropped the axe and stepped into the shade, wiping sweat from his neck. He didn't need to see the badge glinting off the taller man's chest to know trouble had arrived. The man leading war. Gray duster, long and unbothered by the heat, his face was lean, weathered, and calm, the way only men used to drawing steel could be. A man with a right eye twitch, a thin scar on his mouth, 2 pistols, and a perpetual smirk rode beside him. The second man was Pete Branwell, a bounty hunter who cared more about silver than justice, and a former employee of Jonas Finch. The marshal dismounted first afternoon and said, "My name is Essa Trenton, and I'm looking for Colton Hayes." Colton stared at Marshall without flinching. Trenton nodded as if he knew you're hard to track. "I haven't been hiding, only trying to save my daughter." He looked at Ellie. Asterisk softly near the porch, arms crossed. He looked at Leia. Colton said, "She's all I have." Marshall scraped chin. "There's a $500 bounty on your name, accused of murder, arson, robbery out of Tucson." Colton confessed, "I was there, but I didn't light the match." Trenton didn't react. "Truth's a slippery thing, Mr. Hayes. Courts prefer paper better." Branwell snorted. "You really going to spend time? Talking poster says dead or alive. We might be drinking in El Paso by sundown." Trenton looked at him, replied, "I do this by the book," meaning Colton should come with me. Face a judge. Colton moved up and gestured to Leia, who has no one else. Ella's words pierced through the air like a whip. "She does now. All eyes are on her. She stays here. She has milk, a cradle, and someone who won't forget her." Colton swallowed hard. Ellie, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the marshal. "You want justice," she said, "then act like it. He's been here, helping, feeding animals, mending fences, saving a child from dying in the desert. That sound like a guilty man to you?" Trenton exhaled slowly. "What I want, he said, is the truth, and that means taking him in Branwell's hand, hovered near his gun, where Trenton's voice grew. You're soft. The bounty hunter scowled. Marshal Colton's hand jerked, but stayed off his firearm. Trenton nodded. You have 24 hours to prove your story, Hayes. Get your letters, witnesses, and names before I take you in tomorrow. Branwell mounted his horse without waiting for a response, his eyes searing Colton. This ain't over, he mumbled, then turned and galloped off. Ellie stared at Colton. You have any proof? Colton looked at the horizon, possibly Clara. Dow lived close Prescott and saw what happened, but I haven't heard from her in years. Ellie is hailed, and we found her. Colton gazed at Leia sleeping happily in her basket. I can't leave her again. We don't go until we send word and prepare this area, because someone will take you away tomorrow. The wind returned that night, scraping. Over the windows, like dry fingernails, rattled the shutters, and groaned under the eaves like a warning within the Mallister farmhouse. Colton sat by the fire, cleaning his revolver slowly, each piece glinting in the fire. Like each bullet counted, Ellie moved purposefully packing. A small satchel, medical tools, dried meat, spare baby linens. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing. For anything you could still go, she said quietly. The fire-cracked Leia stirred in her cradle, murmuring in her sleep, the innocence in her face. Cut deeper than any knife I ran once. He said, from Red Finch, from the war, from everything I couldn't fix, but not this time. Ellie gave a small nod, then walked to the cabinet by the door and pulled out her father's rifle. Trenton arrived first after daybreak, riding alone with his gray coat powdered from the root. Colton met him at the gate with his revolver holstered. You still planning to take me in? Trenton's eyes were fatigued. Law says I have to, and you're. Instincts. Trenton gazed towards the house, where Ellie stood in the doorway with a gun across her back and a baby in her arms. Colton nodded everything that mattered before Trenton could respond. Hoof-beats thundered in the distance. 4 riders crested the ridge behind them. Branwell at the lead, flanked by 3 rough-looking men with sunburned faces and twitchy fingers. They weren't lawmen, they were wolves dressed like cowhands. Branwell grinned like a man walking into a sure wind. Thought I'd help you out, Marshal, he called in case. Your conscience got in the way. Trenton stiffened Pete, then acted like it. Branwell spat. You got a wanted man right here, $500 says. We take him now. He urged his horse forward, reaching for his rifle. Don't. Trenton warned, drawing his own weapon too late. The first shot cracked from Branwell's gang. Wild, reckless it hit the dirt near Colton. The farm exploded into pandemonium as Colton dove behind the well and fired twice. One of Branwell's men yelped and fell off his horse. Elle fired a clean shot from the window, clipping a second attacker's shoulder. He screamed and dropped his weapon. Branwell raged, killing everyone. Trenton hid behind Colton, firing. Bounty goes ahead of justice, so they fought from cover, pinning the attackers down near the corral. Then a baby said, Layla. Colton's heart squeezed. Ellie was inside, shielding the cradle while reloading. Cover me. Trenton's fire scattered Branwell's remaining soldiers inside the house as Colton dashed towards it. Colton discovered Ellie hunched low, sheltering Leia with her body. I've got her. Ellie handed the baby over and turned back to the window. They're pulling back, but they'll circle about. Colton rocked Leia, whispering, You're okay, little Rose. Trenton kicked open the door with his gun still smoking, saying, It's done. 2 are down. The other ran Branwell's, bleeding out beside the trough, looking at Colton with a low voice. They came for blood, not justice. Ellie cleaned blood from a shallow temple cut, while Trenton holstered his firearm. You're not going to jail today. I'll file the report my way. Colton stared at him while Trenton nodded towards Leia, because some people fight to stay alive, and some fight for someone else that matters. The wind picked up again as they walked outside. The desert carried away the smoke. Dust and blood, but left behind something else resolve. The sun dipped low over dust-water, turning the desert brush. A deep rust-red Ellie stood on the porch rocking, Leia in her arms, while the Colton, Marshal Trenton, quietly dug 2 shallow graves for Branwell's men beside the barn. The third fled, likely to spread his version of the story by the time the last shovel of dirt was packed down. The sky was the color of bruised peaches, and the wind carried the smell of distant sagebrush and something else, smoke. Trenton was the first to turn his head sharply. "You smell that?" Colon froze. "Not the fireplace. No, that's Creosote dry grass." Colton muttered, hugging Halle tight. "Damn it, turning her away from the heat. They're trying to burn us out." Ellie pulled a damp canvas tarp from the barn walls and fought the fire. Trenton joined with a shovel, slapping down embers. Colton ran for the water pump, drenching the sand around the house's perimeter. The fire came. Fast, ravenous, crackling, hungry, the barn groaned as heat licked its walls, bramble eyes wide with panic. "Kicked inside Ellie, the goat," she shouted over the roar. Ellie nodded and darted for the pen. Colton handed Leia off to Trenton. Smoke stung their eyes and sparks danced like fireflies over the soil. The barn roof shrieked and collapsed, spewing embers. Upward, Colton gripped Ellie's arm. "That's enough. We need to fall back." They struggled towards the home as the front door opened. Trenton stood breathless, motioning them inside. Cellars sealed. He coughed. "She's secure." The fire reached the porch's edge, but the wet sand held. Flames licked and sputtered, then died. The wind turned west and carried the fire back on itself, up the hill towards nothing but open land. They'd saved the house, but barely inside. The 3 of them sat in the kitchen, blackened with soot, lungs burning. La fussed weakly from the cellar's edge, unharmed but hungry. Ellie wiped her face with a damp cloth. "They meant to kill us all." Trenton nodded. "Not with Leia here," Colton said. Ellie's face tightened. "This is my land. I'm not leaving it." Colton turned to her. "This place won't matter if we're dead." Trenton raised a hand. "You don't have to run. I'll wire Prescott, ask for a federal inquiry into Finch and his old crew, if we can. Get a judge to look at the evidence again. Maybe we." Colton echoed, exhausted. "But men like Finch don't wait for courtrooms. He'll come same as Branwell did." Ellie stood shoulders square, despite the soot on her dress. "Then let him come. But next time we fight on our terms." Colton met her eyes. There was no fear in them, only fire, the same fire she'd used to beat back the flames. "We'll need help." He said, "This town didn't want me here, but they might help you." Ellie nodded. She entered the porch the next morning with a rifle over her shoulder and chin high. The sun was rising over a burnt field, but the house was still standing. Dustwater Crossing learnt today that the widow on the ridge was drawing a line in the sand as well as living. Dustwater Crossing didn't answer doors anymore because of years of drifters, snake oil salesmen, and men with blood in their pockets. Eleanor Mallister walked down Main Street that morning with a rifle across her back and soot in her hair. She didn't knock. She looked them in the eyes and said, "Marshal, Trenton is alive. Colton Hayes is alive. And if we don't stand together, we'll lose what we have left." Mr. Petty, the storekeeper, blinked. "You asked us to guard a fugitive. I'm asking you to protect a father, a baby, and myself." No one spoke. The blacksmith's room was silent. Said, "Your tools are safe because he held that fire line. Your boy still has a roof because he fought for it." At the church where Father Worm wiped dust from pews, even though no one arrived, she said, "Isn't this where forgiveness starts by mid-afternoon?" 5 guys rode up the ridge road, some with tools, others with antique rifles, and one with a container of provisions, including goat's milk. Colton saw them coming with Leia in his arms on the porch. "They following you?" Ellie dismounted and passed off the baby, smiling. "Not yet, but they ain't turning away either." Rolling sleeves, Trenton left. The barn, that's something. Asterisk, The following days were quiet chaos. Boards were replaced. Barn sides were mended. A new trench line was excavated across the ridge, and Colton showed the blacksmith's boy how to reload a shotgun. Ellie turned her parlor into a field medication. At night after Leia was asleep and the desert cooled, one night she sat with Colton by the fire and handed him a folded letter from Clara Dow, saying she found her cousin in Prescott and he's sending her east, but she left this with the telegrapher. Colton opened it with shaking hands and said, "I remember you pulling me out. I remember the flames and the screams, and I told the sheriff they didn't listen." "It's better than nothing?" Ellie asked. "Considering Branwell's attack and what we just witnessed," Trenton commented, "it might be enough for a judge to question the warrant." Ellie touched his shoulder. "We've come this far?" He looked at her. "You didn't have to stay in this." "I did," she said, her voice quiet, but fierce, "because I don't run either that night." Colton kissed her for the first time, not with desperation, but with the ache of a man who'd gone too long without warmth and the gratitude of someone who'd finally found it outside. The desert wind howled over sage, brush, and dry. The house was quiet again. Mostly rebuilt smoke scars still marred parts of the barn, but the fence lines were whole. The garden Repla's cradle, freshly carved from mesquite wood by the blacksmith's apprentice Colton, sat under the cottonwood tree with Leia nestled in his arms. She'd fallen asleep after her evening feed, mouth slightly open, fist resting against his chest every breath she took seemed like a Ellie joined them in silence with 2 tin cups of coffee, sitting close enough to touch their shoulders, but not moving. "She's tough," Ellie remarked softly, glancing at the baby. "She gets it from her mama." Ellie looked away. "I wasn't talking about Mary Beth." Colton chuckled quietly. "She got her stubbornness from both of you." They sipped quietly. Crickets sang in the distance. A coyote called out low and lonely, and somewhere across the ridge the wind shifted and brought the scent of lavender and iron. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Ellie shrugged. "I used to after my husband died. I thought about heading east, maybe Arkansas, but every time I packed I looked out at this land, and I couldn't do it. Something in it felt unfinished." He nodded. "Same thing Mary Beth said before." Ellie turned to him, the stars illuminating his emerald eyes. "Evaluate Isla's sleeping face before running. I'm tired of running." The woman who'd taken him in, saved his daughter, fought beside him through fire and bullets, and never once flinched. "Ellie Mallister," he said, voice low. "I don't have much to offer, just 2 hands, a decent aim, and a baby girl who already thinks. You hung the moon, but if you'll have us, we'd like to stay." She leaned in slowly, her forehead on his. "I don't want grand speeches, Colton. Just someone who won't leave when the wind gets mean." "I swear to you," he said, "on Mary Beth's grave, and on every mile I've ridden to keep this child breathing, I'm not going anywhere." After placing Leia in her cradle and cuddling under a comforter, Ellie mumbled against his shoulder, "Tomorrow's a long way off, but I think we'll meet it just fine." Colton hugged her. "For the first time in years. I believe that too." Overhead, the stars flicker slowly and steadily, sending light that takes 1,000 years to reach Earth, but arrives when needed. 3 years later, Dustwater Crossing was no longer a whisper of a town. The saloon had real glass in the windows. The church had a proper roof. The schoolhouse down by the creek rang with children again. The windmill spun clean and sure, and the roads had wagon ruts from regular traffic. But the town's heart beat just west of the ridge, where a small homestead stood surrounded by rows of thriving crops. A new barn Leia, a quick-footed toddler with sandy locks and a loud giggle, ruled like a desert queen. Ella called from the garden, where she worked her tummy obviously round with their second child, only if she slows down long enough to sit. Still, Colton sat with her under the cottonwood tree, carving a cedar block into a horse. "She'll ride better than us," He ducks as Leia throws a pebble at him and squeals. The past wasn't forgotten. It never would be. Marshal Trenton returned with official pardon papers, signed and sealed, based on witness testimony and his Dustwater Siege report read. Finch went underground, but his network had crumbled, and his bounty faded with the truth revealed. Colton was now a father and husband, and thanks to Ellie's gentle insistence and the town's stubborn trust, a part-time field medic and riding instructor. Came from neighboring counties for Ellie's midwifery, and Colton's name was etched into a fence post at town's edge. One evening after supper and lullabies, Hayes' household welcomes all. Colton and Ellie watched the sky turn pink to violet, to deep blue on the porch. "I still can't believe this is ours," he said, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Ellie leaned into him, her hand over her belly. "It's not ours," she said. Inside Mom, Ela called, "Papa, I lost my bear." Colton laughed. "Guess it's back to work." Kissed Ellie's temple like he always did, and stepped inside. She stayed behind a moment longer, watching the stars rise. The same stars that had once watched them fight, flee, and pray, now witnessed peace and the quiet, unshakable thing they'd built: a life, a family, and a future. Her hands strong and her eyes hopeful, and just over the ridge, the desert wind whispered of stories for eons.